Probably, if we can't get the mics up and going, we'll all just speak up. Can you all hear in the back fine?
What?
Okay. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I am Jamie Fawcett, currently president of Citizens for Constitutional Government. If you are not a great supporter of our Constitution as it was originally intended to be applied by our founding fathers, and you might be in the wrong room. But as I look across this room, what I see is a large group of patriots. And as I was driving up here tonight, I thought of Valley Forge. Wonder why. Those temperatures outside are frigid, and I just thank the Lord that we still have many, many patriots across this country who are committed enough to their country to brave the cold, make sacrifices, stand up for what God has given us in this land of freedom through our founding fathers and through the original document that they, under God's guidance, produced, the Constitution of our United States. So we appreciate every one of you coming out tonight. I know it was an added challenge to try to find us back here, but when I found out this facility was available and the name was the Liberty Training Center, we had to go with this. We were in a government-funded library, which was not particularly friendly to us. So we are here, and we appreciate these facilities. We do rent this facility, of course, and if you can help us out by donating tonight, we have a hat out there. That's not to keep your head warm, that's to keep still pay so we can meet here monthly. Great. We always start our meetings with an acknowledgement of the God who our founding fathers knew was the foundation for a free society. So I have asked Chuck Baker if he would open us with prayer. We will follow that by the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everybody could please stand.
Heavenly Father, we thank you that we can still meet this. Pray, Lord, to speak us.
That works.
We pray, Lord, that you will
Testing.
inspire the speakers, and that you will give the listeners open hearts and minds and learn that position to serve the freedom. This country is based on biblical principles of freedom, Lord, and we've strayed from it, and we're seeing the results of that. Please help us to get back as our numbers increase, our interest in activities increase. Bless us in our endeavor. We pray in Jesus' name.
Amen.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just a couple of quick announcements. We want to give all the time that we can to the speakers that are coming here. We do have an event sheet that was on some of the seats as you were coming in. Thank you very much. Great. Now I'll be able to talk tomorrow when I don't.
I'm a substitute teacher, and I'm subbing tomorrow for high school, which is a little bit of a frightening prospect, but I don't want to lose my voice tonight. If you did not get an event sheet, we do have a couple of extra. Is there anybody who did not get one? We just try to let folks know. There are several people in the back here. Kathy, if you want to pass that back or take that back to them. All right, and in case you're not aware of the restrooms situation, the one off the lobby is for the ladies. This back hall you can access through a back hall over by a couple of offices, and that is where the gentleman's restroom is. I wanted to ask Joe McCormick if he would just quickly announce that he has a constitutional seminar that I think is either starting up or in progress, and we do everything we can to promote knowledge of the Constitution. So, Joe, where are you?
We don't have a date yet.
Okay.
So we use
Okay. And you have a sign up?
I do have a sign-up sheet.
Right. Sign-up sheet, yellow pad out here on the sign-in desk. So if you're interested in that. And where will it be, Joe, generally?
We'll either be in the Franklin area or in the backfill supplies.
Okay, very good. And if you did not sign in as you came in, please sign in as you go out. If you would like to be added to our email list, we try to keep folks in the local area apprised of a variety of events that patriots are interested in, opportunities to express our voice, and our monthly meetings, as well as some of the urgent legislative action alerts that we feel are worthy of your time. We do not try to flood you. My kids laugh at how many emails I still have because I haven't gone back and gone through them all. So we usually send out maybe one a week or so, 1 or 2 a week. So, all right, with that being said, our format tonight is to allow each of our speakers about a half an hour for their presentations. Mr. Davies will begin, and then Mr. McManus. And then after that, we will have an opportunity for an open question and answer from the audience. Mr. Davies is 59 and married, has 3 children. He's a native of Houston, Texas, with a nuclear engineering degree from Texas A&M. He moved to Pennsylvania in June of 2000 for his work. Initially, he lived in Chester County near Pottstown, then moved to Beaver County, northwest of Pittsburgh in 2003. He has spent 35 and more years working in the utility industry, primarily fossil fuel power plant environmental management compliance, community relations, government relations, and commercial asset management. He is currently employed as Director of Business Development for CB&I, which is a large international engineering and construction firm headquartered in Texas. Mr. Davies said that he became intensely interested in the Convention of States Article 5 effort in 2013, given the results of the 2012 national elections and the publication of Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments. He volunteered to be a Convention of States district captain in early 2014 and stepped up to the state director role in July 2014. He is an NRA member, but doesn't hunt anymore, a very strong supporter of Second Amendment rights. And he states that he is involved in COS for God and country and for the sake of my kids. Mr. Davies.
Thank you. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Just to try here. Being the native Texan, I am not a fan of the weather. My wife loves Pennsylvania. She says she'll never leave. Anything below about 20 makes me really miss Houston. Although I'll admit the summers are pretty brutal down there. She read my bio. I think that probably pretty much covers everything. I've been a fan of talk radio probably going back 25 years, and really didn't get thinking seriously about getting actively involved outside of the normal stuff you do as a citizen, voting and supporting candidates until the day after Obama was reelected, which really blew me away. I really thought the numbers were really against him. And so for me, it was kind of a signal that, hey, sitting back is not going to get it. My kids are of an age where they need to see me being involved and standing on principle, doing the right thing. So in any event, I got involved in convention of states at that point. So here's what I'm going to talk about tonight, and I've got a fair number of slides, but I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. So if you have questions, we can hold them to me. And also, I've got copies. I've got hard copies of this deck with me. I've got 50 copies. If you don't get one and want one, let me know. Give me contact information. I'm happy to send it to you. So you don't have to worry about taking notes or trying to memorize anything in terms of what's in the deck. Just focus on your questions, and you can have the deck for reference later. So I'll talk about state convention history of Article 5 applications. I'll talk a little bit about, maybe a lot about the objections that at least I've heard to the option. I'll talk about Article 5 process advantages, and then if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about options. To start out with, language is really important. I've discovered as I've gotten involved in Article 5 convention issues. And so I want to talk just for a brief moment about what I'm going to talk about and what I mean by a convention. I've heard multiple folks define a constitutional convention in multiple ways. I've listed some of them up here. A convention organized by a number of states for the purpose of replacing the current Constitution. I would agree that that's a constitutional convention. The others on the list, I would not define as necessarily a constitutional convention. Others may say it doesn't start out as one, but it winds up being one. I understand all that. For me, and what I'm going to talk about tonight is a convention that's called under Article 5 for the purposes of proposing amendments to the current Constitution consistent with the state application language. And here's a disclaimer. I believe that calling a convention for the purposes of creating a brand new Constitution or of altering the existing Constitution in any way that does not comport with the framers' intent would be a huge mistake. And neither I nor anyone at COS support, endorse, or otherwise approve of such an effort. And I took the trouble to send this down to the national office, had council review it. Didn't want to say anything they didn't agree with. So at least the national office folks and Steve Davies, this is what I believe. All right, let's talk a little bit about history. And I know many of you probably know more about constitutional history and perhaps early history of the nation and republic than I do. But in researching for this presentation for the event tonight, I did do some looking at what's been the history in this nation of conventions going back before Declaration of Independence. And there's a fairly robust history. Strictly common in the Northeast and New England states. The colonies always had a history of working together, particularly around defense issues. They would get together, either the Crown would call conventions, the colonial governors, or the colonies themselves would call themselves together in what's called a full dress convention, where there would be delegates selected and they would attend. And so I've looked at some examples here. Again, up through about the 1750s, these were all generally around defense issues, either frontier issues with Indians, and getting into the 1750s, the French and Indian War started heating up, which was really the North American front for a war between France and England. And there was a lot of discussion at that point, particularly in New York, and what are we going to do about the French and the Indians. And then going on later into the 1770s and 60s, there began to be more discussions about the issues with Great Britain and what we as a nation would be doing about that. I want to call out 4 conferences in particular, mainly because there were either a large number of colonies that attended or there was a significant outcome. And these conferences here were ones that, because of the way they were formed and the large participation and again, the quality, the content of the output, these tended to be a model of what the framers were thinking of when they wrote the Article 5 language, calling for a convention as an option to amend the Constitution. So after the Declaration of Independence, the convention game didn't stop. The states, at that time they would have been sovereign states, got together to talk about a variety of issues. Generally, these were either commerce related, there were border disputes that they got together to talk about, again, predominantly in the Northeast, but there were also some conventions that included states from the Mid-Atlantic and south of that area. And again, I've called out 3 here in particular as being a large number of states that participated. Obviously, the one in Annapolis in 1786, really the failure of that convention is what led to the convention in 1787 that at the time they referred to as the Philadelphia Convention. I think modern terminology is the Constitutional Convention. So if you go back and take a look at what the available literature is, the documentation we have of these various conventions, again, going up through 1787, you can see that during the founding era, calls and applications for conventions were occasionally rescinded and they were made conditional. You'll see that the states were free during the founding era to honor or reject calls. They didn't have to show up. In fact, in 1786, many did not go to Annapolis, which in my reading, Washington was pretty upset about that and was concerned about the 1787 convention. Didn't even want to go if it was going to be another kind of no-show from a large number of states. So again, some states went, some didn't. It just depended, I guess, on if they had time or were interested. The states were able to select commission pay, instruct their delegates as they wished, and they could also alter instructions and recall after the convention was convened. The states could define subject matter for conventions. They could instruct their delegates which way to vote. Well, after the conventions were called, the conventions got together once they were in session and made the rules for the convention, elected officers, staff committees, set times of adjournment, that sort of thing, no ministerial sorts of things. To my knowledge, the only attempts during the founding era to insert in the convention call things other than time, place, and subject matter were unsuccessful. I know Massachusetts tried on at least one occasion to suggest that there needs to be something other than one state, one vote. That was rejected. And so by 1787, it appears the framers had extensive knowledge, either personal experience with conventions, attending them themselves, or they had significant knowledge of how these things are supposed to work with respect to a group of sovereign entities to resolve an issue. So I think the perspective the framers had, going back to 1787, when they drafted the Article 5 language, when Mason raised his hand and said we need to have a convention option, when people heard the word convention, I think this is what they were thinking about. An intergovernmental diplomatic gathering, a forum in which states could meet on the basis of sovereign equality, a mechanism that would put the states on equal footing with Congress in proposing amendments, and that they would be attended by commissioners rather than delegates. They used the term commissioner, who would operate under agency law and remain within the limits of their commissions. Agency law means they were going as an agent of a sovereign entity. So to kind of emphasize and underscore that, if you compare what the Article 5 Convention intent was to what the pre-Constitutional Convention's intent was, I think the framers were very careful in Article 5 to suggest that there are some things that we need to do differently compared to the way conventions were called and managed in the past. So for Article 5, the intent would be to propose solutions only, not to actually resolve issues. Plenipotentiary was not authorized, but they couldn't just talk about anything. There was a defined scope, a defined agenda. Applications would come from the states only, not from Congress or from anybody else. The call for the convention would come from Congress. A few states could not get together and kind of unilaterally call a convention. It had to be something that came from Congress to give it substance, I think, status and stature within the republic, and that the calls would be mandatory if at least 2/3 of the states applied. And then Congress would have the ability to determine the state amendment review process, be it by state convention or by the state legislature. So Congress has that option to determine which way to go, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Modern era state conventions, many don't realize that the state conventions continue. We have state conventions ongoing. They really fall into two basic categories, either interstate compacts, generally around environmental and water rights issues. These are things where the states agree legally to be bound to compact rules or regulations, and these things require the approval of Congress. Uniform law is different. This is where the states get together in conference. There's actually a conference of commissioners that is a standing group that organizes these conferences. The members, typically appointed by state governors, and they get together to ensure that state laws are consistent. They don't get together to create a new universal law that covers all the states. That's not the point. The point is for things that are outside federal jurisdiction, like tort, contract and family law, the states would have common rules around those sorts of things so that when issues came up, citizens moving back and forth between states, these things could be handled consistently. Uniform commercial code is probably the best example of that. So I'm going to move on to talk about Article 5. After the Constitution was adopted and ratified, the following year, Virginia actually dropped the first Article 5 application. Their intent was to get everybody back together to talk about things that came up during the ratification conferences with the states and get the defects corrected. As many of you know, the Bill of Rights and First 10 Amendments were not part of the original Constitution. They came later with the first Congress, and as I recall, Madison really had to prod them to get them together and to do it. He felt like they made a commitment. As a matter of honor, they needed to get together and make this right, and consult and make it happen. Between 1788 and 2014, by my count, there were 728 Article 5 applications from all 50 states on a variety of topics. I'm not going to read the rest of these. You guys will get a copy of the handout, but suffice it to say there's been a large number of these things, including, if you look at certain time frames, there's been enough conventions called in terms of raw bean count from enough states to actually have a convention called. I think one of the reasons, or probably the primary reason why that hasn't happened, well, two. One is in many cases the applications were not all on the same topic, so from a bean count perspective, you could arguably say that I don't have, as Congress, enough applications on the same topic to warrant 2/3 count to call a convention. And I think, frankly, in other cases, there may have actually been enough. But Congress didn't call the convention, the states didn't push it, so it got kicked down the road. Some more data here, some more stats. I won't get into that. But the last bullet here I'll talk about a little bit. And again, researching in my role as state director, I came across information that made it clear that Pennsylvania actually has submitted applications for Article 5 conventions regarding at least 4 topics going back to 1900. You can see data, you can see evidence, you see documentation that there was a call for direct election of senators around the turn of the last century. There was some things in the 40s around income tax and other fiscal limits on government spending. And then more currently, at least for my generation, right to life call was passed in 1979 by the State Assembly, and they also passed the balanced budget resolution in 1979. So there's a lot of talk about how many we really have that have requested a balanced budget convention. When you look at the list, if it's 27 or whatever the number is, it's in the mid-20s right now. Understand Pennsylvania is one of those states. In 2014, there's been 12 Article 5 applications, 6 for the balanced budget amendment, 3 for convention states, which is the organization obviously run by road. And then 3 other states have passed applications calling for a convention to talk about limits on campaign donation or campaign finance reform. So those are the 12 we've had for 14, and presumably we'll continue to have these things dropping in, going forward. So let's talk about Article 5 objections. We've got a list, probably familiar to a lot of folks here in the room. It's going to be a ConCon. The delegates cannot be prevented from opposing and adopting amendments that would in effect rewrite the Constitution. In conjunction with that, the delegates can also change the ratification rule for amendments, similar allegedly to what happened in 1787. It won't matter if the Fed ignores the Constitution now. Federal courts will not rule in favor of the states in any dispute involving the Article 5 convention processes, so the deck is stacked against the states. Educating voters and electing the right members of Congress is the best thing to do. Congress has the authority to control all aspects of any convention, including delegate count, selection, and voting rules. And the states should be nullifying federal laws, not pursuing a convention. And then George Soros is behind all of this anyway. So one of the things that, again, looking at some of the history and reading back on framers' notes, I noticed there's been a little bit of an evolution of language around Article 5 convention. In the Constitution itself, originally it said a convention for the purposes, and still does, of proposing amendments to the Constitution. In the early 1800s, somewhere along the line, folks started talking about this being a constitutional convention for the purposes of proposing amendments to the Constitution. Again, all in the context of Article 5. And now, today, in some forms, you'll hear folks talking about Article 5 resulting in a constitutional convention to create a new Constitution. So the language is morphing on us, and I think it's important to understand that. And the reason why I had my disclaimer and my definitions up front is to let you know that the yellow box is where I am on Article 5, not the other stuff. So a runaway convention is really a ConCon. One of the things that's interesting is if you take a look at the two processes that we have to amend the Constitution, they're very, very similar. People elect representatives, the representatives get together in some form to adopt amendments, and then if enough members of Congress, in the case of the top line, agree on amendment language, then it would go to the states for ratification. And the 27 amendments that we have so far, that's how we got all 27 of them, just through that process. The second process is Article 5, basically. And the thing that's different, as you can tell, is what happens within these two bands right here. In one case, you've got 535 members of Congress. And in another case, you've got delegates or commissioners that are selected by the state legislatures. And if in theory each state picks 10, that would give you 500. So you've got roughly 500 people, men and women, in both cases. In my hypothetical case, if there's 10 per state, making a determination about what ought to be recommended to be an amendment, and then after they're done, the appropriate vote level is reached, then it would go back out to the states. In my discussions with other folks on this topic, often it comes down to the convention delegates. That these guys, ladies, will be totally out of control. There's really no hooks on them. There's no strings attached. Once the convention's convened, they're on their own. They can do whatever. And we're off and running, and we'll just have to wait and see what they come out with. When you probe on that a little bit, it turns out the problem is really not the convention delegates, according to some. It's Congress It's the state legislatures, and it's we the people that voted for these knuckleheads to sit in these bodies. That's the problem. So it's not just the convention delegates. It's really everybody, all of us. And I don't disagree with that. I think, though it's a matter of degree, I think Congress is a huge problem. And I agree that we can expect no help from the current Congress at all in regards to things that we're all talking about and interested in tonight. And this last week's debacle with Boehner and the voting and whatnot is just reinforces this my view of how screwed up DC is. So I've got them in red. You'll see that I've got the state legislatures and the convention delegates in pink. I don't think they're as bad as Congress, but they're definitely not really white. The convention delegates, I don't know, obviously in advance who the states will select or how they'll select them. I think it's fair to say that there'll be state representatives and senators themselves potentially will be the convention delegates. So I colored them in the same color. And then the people, us, I think there's a lot of people that are red in this country. There's no question about it. But I think there's a lot of people that are a long ways away from red, including everybody in this room. I don't care if you're in John Birch Society or not. I think anybody in this room would be an excellent convention delegate, frankly. You love the Constitution, you love God, you love the country. That's the kind of people I think you could be at this thing. And so I think it's possible that the people can make this process work. I know there's a lot of debate about that, but that's why you'll see different colors on this slide. That's my personal view of where we are in the country right now. When we talk about runaway convention, you hear folks talk about, well, it's what happened originally with the Philadelphia Convention. They went outside the charter, all these bad things happened. I've listed out here the way the processes are either work or intended to work in the case of the Article 5 process. You'll notice on the left-hand side there are 1787 Articles of Confederation. There's no arrow between Articles and the Philadelphia Convention. That's because there was nothing in the Articles of Confederation that contemplated a convention process. The Articles talked about unanimous approval from both Congress and the states, but there wasn't any language in there about a convention. That happened when the states got together and decided that's what they wanted to do, and they set it up and did it, which is one of the reasons I think why we have some real prescriptive detail in Article 5 about how this is supposed to work. So the Philadelphia Convention was held. They reported out the draft Constitution, recommended that it be adopted, along with the current ratification process. All 13 states initiated ratification efforts, and one thing I discovered that I didn't know until this year is that 2 states had to have 2 conventions to actually ratify the Constitution. It didn't happen right out of the gate. So 9 states ratified the Constitution in 1788. It was declared to be in effect because they had the 3/4 vote. And the first year Congress was actually seated was in the following year in March, I believe, in 1789. The last state, Rhode Island, they were a pain then, they were a pain now, as far as I'm concerned. They didn't ratify until 1790. And frankly, and I'll admit, the only reason they ratified, their first convention failed. They met again and ratified because they had a gun to their head. The other 12 were ready to kick them out of the country, and you're fine, you guys go it alone. And then they couldn't survive, so they're all right. I think it was only about 2 votes that passed, by the way. Those guys were something else. All right, so again, I kind of talked about this a little bit, but when you look at the process that I had on the left here, the criticism you'll hear is the delegates exceeded the charter with just too many articles, that they changed the ratification requirement from the majority rule to 3/4. And then finally, the fact that all 13 states initiated ratification efforts does not reflect unanimous approval by the states of the revised ratification process. We'll talk about some of that probably in the Q&A. So the other thing that I mentioned, you'll hear about convention outcomes will be ignored, as is the case with the Constitution. My view and the Convention of States view is that there really are 2 constitutions. There's one the framers originally gave us with the first 10 amendments, the original Constitution, the one that we all know and love. And then there's another Constitution. There's a Constitution that has been created by progressive attacks, by frankly all 3 branches of the federal government, abdication of responsibility, Supreme Court deciding they know what's constitutional and what's not. And so we've got something out there that kind of looks and feels like the old Constitution, but in practice it's not. That's the Constitution that I believe that in general is being adhered to by the federal government. Not obviously perfectly, but they're adhering to that one a heck of a lot closer than they are to the original one. I believe that simple, concisely worded amendments will be extremely difficult to successfully challenge in court. I know that they'll fight it. If we wind up having an Article 5 convention, it will be litigated on the way up, during, and on the way down. There's no question it will be litigated, and particularly by progressives and those that are very, very unhappy with whatever is accomplished in the convention relative to restricting federal control and federal power. But again, I think they'll ultimately have to pull back, and they'll have to do what they've done over the last 100 years. They'll start chipping away at it. As soon as the new amendments, if there are any that get ratified, I guarantee you the next year, the next day, the forces on the other side are going to say, all right, we had this convention, and they passed all this stuff that really trims us back. We've got to figure out how we're going to do this. We did it before, we'll try it again. And I think for the rest of us that are on the other side, we'll have to stay ever vigilant against that kind of thing. I think any amendments that are ratified will enjoy huge political support. You'll have 38 states who would have ratified them. There'll be extensive debate. I can't imagine how bad it'll be in the media relative to this sort of an effort. But again, I think that if the convention is called, if amendments are reported out, and if they're ratified by 38 states, it will be very, very difficult for anybody to lie down in front of that. And again, why not at least try? Stay the course, educate voters, vote for constitutional conservatives. I fully am in support of this. My only concern about this, the trajectory of the Fed over time has been to become less conservative. I think some things Congress will never approve, like term limits or repeal the 17th Amendment. I think those are both desirable. And again, I think it's kind of an all-of-the-above strategy like energy policy. Don't just do this or just do that. Let's do it all. Give it all a shot. Nullification. I've talked to many folks that believe this is the way to go. Even though it may not be specifically referenced and called out verbatim in the Constitution, it's clearly implied by the 10th Amendment, they would say. I think that that's a pretty big legal lift, frankly, but I'm not opposed to giving it a shot. If we made it happen, I think it's worth it. Again, kind of all of the above strategy. In some things I've read, folks suggest that if you have a majority of the states pass a law, then you have one state nullified. Doesn't that create some chaos around who's playing by what rules? Maybe so. I don't know. But I think if it can work, if it can get us to where we need to be in terms of restoring the Constitution, I have no issue with it. You know, George Soros, there's no doubt the guy is monkeying around with all of our lives in various forms. I wish he was supporting us financially. He's not. Everything that I do coming here tonight, it's all on my dime. I'm not aware of anything that's being supported by substantial donors like this for the Convention of States. I know there are donors, but Soros is not one of them. I know he, in some of the groups that he would support or under, would love to have an Article 5 convention for campaign finance reform and probably other progressive initiatives. They'd probably love to repeal many of the first 10 amendments, many of the Bill of Rights, change them dramatically. My view is that if 34 states want to adopt something along these lines, and they want to call a convention, and then 38 states ratify it, and they follow the process, they follow the law, and we wind up with a bunch of junk coming out of this, shame on us, but it's the law of the land, and it's up to us to make sure that, whatever comes out of these conventions, if they're called or appropriate. I think there's a lot of checks around that. And speaking of that, I'll talk a little bit about the Article 5 convention process and why I don't think it's going to be a con. Again, the states must apply for the same amendment topics, not exact wording. I think exact wording going into convention with amendment wording within the state. Because I think things can happen in the convention where somebody may make a suggestion. I think the language can be dramatically improved if we can insert this or take that out. Arguably, if the convention calls for a specific language, and that's not what's adopted, then was it a legitimate convention? Was what they come out with legitimate? I think that's an argument to be made. So leave it broad within defined parameters. States can, and frankly they are, adopting delegate limitation legislation, including delegate recall authority. There are 2 states right now that have done it in the last year, Georgia, Indiana, in anticipation of an Article 5 convention for whatever topic. States are also needing to develop rules of order for any Article 5 convention. There's an organization called the Assembly of State Legislatures that's met 3 times. They're drafting up the rules for any Article 5 convention, again, irrespective of content. About 30 states are involved in that right now. Pennsylvania, unfortunately, is not one, but I think as we get closer and closer to a convention potentially being called, we'll see more and more states getting on board with this bipartisan effort to come up with some rules for any convention that is held. And then frankly, I think convention proceedings will likely be completely transparent. I don't think the room will be open for anybody to be there because they won't want disruption. But I do think it's reasonable to expect that there will be live C-SPAN type broadcast of all conference proceedings. I think delegates, whoever they are, will be under intense pressure and scrutiny. And I think it's highly unlikely that there will be a closed-door endeavor where you don't find out what they did or what they talked about until 3 or 4 or 5 months down the road. I think it's highly unlikely. If nothing else, it'll be on YouTube. Reasons for pursuing an Article 5 convention now, in my view, we have a state house composition that's very favorable. 69 of 99 state houses are now Republican controlled. That's a conservative move, if you will. It's, for me, easier to talk to Republicans about an Article 5 convention than it is Democrats. It shouldn't be, but it is. So there's some indication from me anyway that if it's going to happen relatively easily, we've got that working in our favor in all the state houses. Intense grassroots or increasing grassroots support for decisive action. I think more and more people are becoming more and more aware of the problems we have in D.C. and what's happened to the Constitution, which is good for all of us. The more of our friends and neighbors that are paying attention and trying to get involved in whether you've done Birch society or convention states, that's a good thing for all of us. I think the threat of the Constitution, the threat of a convention would have a real material positive impact in D.C. I think once we get down the path far enough, once you get 25, 28 states signing up for a convention, similar to balanced budget amendment, but for something that says we want to restrict the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, D.C. is going to react to that. They're going to fight it, no question about it, but they may also try to do some things to dial it back and do things that we would say would be in the right direction. Again, I think a successful convention could repair and restore major portions of the Constitution fairly quickly, and depending on what's debated and what ultimately gets ratified by the states. And again, I don't think time is on our side. It gets worse and worse on a day-to-day basis, and it just gets harder and harder for us to get this thing turned around. There's a mathematical equation as an engineer that always trips us up. Those of us that do environmental compliance work, and you have an environmental activist ask you, what are the risks that your plant or that emission can cause cancer? And I don't care how much control technology you put on it, the fact that they're making one molecule of SO2 or CO2 going out that stack means that I can't say there's zero going out. I can't say there's zero risk. I can't say that. I can say it's very, very minimal. And I can say we've done a lot to minimize the risk. We've added a lot of zeros. But I can't guarantee anything. I can't guarantee any of this. All of us will make it home alive tonight. So when folks ask me, how can you guarantee that the convention won't do this or won't do that or the states won't do this? I can't guarantee anything. I can minimize the risk. I can add zeros. I can talk about adding more zeros, but I can never get it to be zero. This is a challenge. So there's options. I've got a list here. It's my list, so I get to put up my votes. The only reason I have those three in yellow is that I don't think they're enough soon enough. I have no objections with any of them, although I think just hoping for the best, prepare for the worst. Effectively the same as doing nothing. I don't think doing nothing is an option for any of us. And this is my last kind of series of slides here. Some of you may have heard of the Tycho cycle, which was originally attributed to an old Scottish historian. I understand he had nothing to do with it. He did talk about the life cycle of a democracy or a constitutional republic, but he never organized it in this fashion. So you start with faith and you go around the horn. I've actually seen people assign decades or dates to these things based on starting in 1776 and going around the horn here. For me, it's easy to think about maybe the first 125 years of our republic is kind of on the right side, and it's clearly on the left side. The majority of our population is moving through around back to the top. I don't think every U.S. citizen is all of us are all in this exact same place. I think there's a distribution process, but clearly the peak, if you will, is sliding around clockwise on this thing. And so for me, the question is, can we break the cycle? Are we deep enough in complacency and apathy that people will wake up enough to take action and prevent us from having to complete the loop? Can we short circuit this thing? Can we get back to the right side of the cycle? And I'm done.
you very much. Okay, well, he's taking his hardware apart there. I have asked Lynn McLean if she would introduce Mr. McManus. Lynn has been a longtime member of Citizens for Constitutional Government, and also even longer than that, connected with the John Birch Society. As far as myself, my parents were original founding members of a chapter in Santa Barbara when I was about 4 years old. I won't tell you when that was, but a while ago. And so I have a personal high regard for any organization that has been fighting for liberty as long as the John Birch Society has, whether you agree with their various positions or not. I just thank the Lord that there are patriots who have been long in this battle. Many of us in the Tea Party movement woke up after pretty much being asleep or not very active about, 2009, 2008. And I appreciate every patriot who has been involved long before that in defending our freedom. So Lynn, if you will introduce Mr. McManus, please. And thank you very much, Mr. Davies.
Good evening. John McManus was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1935. He graduated from Holy Cross College, and he was a lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps for 3 years. And before working for the John Birch Society exclusively, he worked as an electrical engineer for 6 years. And he served in the John Birch Society since 1966. He's worked in various capacities, from being just a member, to Director of Public Affairs, to the President and Editor of the New American Magazine. Mr. McManus is the author of several books, and he's written and produced numerous audio-visual programs for the education of the public. And he also is a frequent contributor to the New American Magazine. He often writes articles for it. Mr. McManus has appeared on numerous national radio and television programs, and is one of the Society's few authorized spokesmen. He is married, he has 4 children, and 5 grandchildren, I understand. So, will you help me welcome Mr. John McManus?
Okay, if you have an open seat next to you, would you mind moving toward the center? We have a few folks that didn't get a seat yet. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I used to be an electrical engineer, so I managed to follow this up.
Uh-oh, there we go. There we go.
There you go. I know you lost the one. Now it's back. Yeah, it is right there. It's on the left.
It's on the left, that's why.
The right wing isn't functioning.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving up an evening of your time to come and listen to this. And I'm going to insist that it's very important, and that I'm glad you're here, and I hope you can gain something from our presentation and take it back and share it with others. So let's move ahead. I wonder what the problem is in that or in me.
No, it's,
Yeah,
I think it's a projector.
it's in the projector. Don't worry about it.
It's all in there.
All right, well, let's move ahead.
Yeah.
I call this talk a constitutional convention under a microscope. I'm going to start off with a little bit of, I don't think I need the mic. Let me know if I do.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, you do need it.
I want everybody to...
You need the
You
mic.
need the microphone.
Need the mic. Okay.
Thank you.
I put up a little bit of what I call lost awareness. This is something that Americans used to know and a lot of Americans don't know today. America became great not because of what government did, but because of what government was prevented from doing by the Constitution. So we've got a great Constitution and we want to make sure it stays. We want to keep it and not take it away. I'm going to skip ahead here because I'm only supposed to talk for half an hour. All right, I got a question for everyone here. All right. Do current government officials obey the limitations on their powers contained in the Constitution?
No.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. Here's the next question. Will current government officials who don't abide by the existing limitations honor the limitations in a new amendment?
Probably not.
So then why are we here?
Yes.
It depends. Well, we'll see. Okay. The real need is better government officials, especially in the House of Representatives. And I'll make that case later and tell you why I'm focusing on the House of Representatives. Right? Now, there are people who want to amend the Constitution. They claim to want improvement. But they will open it up to a complete overhaul and call for a constitutional convention. Now, you can call it a convention of the states, you can call it something else, you can call it this, you can call it that. There's only one process that's in the Constitution itself, and it's called the Constitutional Convention. So we're going to stick with that terminology and not talk about a convention of the states or anything else. A constitutional convention is what we should be discussing. There are two ways to have a constitutional convention. There are two ways to amend the Constitution. The first way is 2/3 of both houses of Congress agree to propose amendments. Such amendments must be then ratified by 3/4 of the states. This process had led to 27 amendments. 27 amendments in much more than 200 years of the existence of the Constitution. Now that says one thing. It says one of two things. It says either that the Constitution was pretty good in the first place and didn't need amendment, or it says that the people are too silly or too involved in fluff and other things that they're not even bothered with it. Now, let's look at the 27 amendments. The first 10, of course, are the Bill of Rights. And I consider that as much a part of the original Constitution as the Constitution itself. So we're down to 17. And then we see that there's one amendment to outlaw the manufacture and distribution of alcohol, which was later nullified by another amendment that canceled the First Amendment. So there's two that canceled each other. So we're down to 15. We have 15 amendments in 200 and almost 240 years. I think that says something good about the Constitution. Now, the other process for amending the Constitution is the Constitutional Convention. 2/3 of the states petition Congress, that's key, Congress, to create a ConCon. All amendments resulting from this convention must be ratified by 3/4 of the states if the convention hasn't altered or abolished the process for the states to amend. Can a constitutional convention alter the process for the states? Well, we've only had one constitutional convention in the history of our country. It was held under the Articles of Confederation, which is the government of the United States during the War for Independence. Now, the Articles of Confederation required that if you're going to amend it, you have to get it unanimous. You have to get all 13 states. So they got together to revise the Articles of Confederation via the amendment process, and they said, well, this is crazy. This thing isn't worth amending, and they got rid of it. They just simply, in effect, tore it up and threw it away. the Articles of Confederation were dead. And for the period of the Constitutional Convention until the time that it was ratified, the new Constitution, we didn't have a federal government. Can that happen again? What they did was also alter the process for the states to ratify. They went from a unanimous 13 down to 3/4, 9. Where did they get the authority to do that? Well, it turns out that a constitutional convention is, in effect, a sovereign body. It can do whatever it wants. And it was shown by the tossing out of the Articles of Confederation and coming up with a whole new constitution. The U.S. Constitution, Alexander Hamilton said, amendments are for remedying defects, not for enacting new laws. So if there's a defect in the Constitution, you want to amend it to take care of the defect. A convention of the states, there's no mention of any such thing in the Constitution of the United States. Absolutely no mention. Go to Article 5 in the Constitution and they talk about a constitutional convention. Ratification by the states, the 1787 ConCon had a mandate only to alter the Articles of Confederation. That was their mandate. But it canceled the Articles and even changed the requirements from unanimous approval of amendments to only 3/4 of the states needed for approving the new Constitution, and then adding new amendments after that. So they can do what they want. Constitutional Convention is not limited. Now, there are myths regarding the Constitutional Convention. The myths are that the states can control a country. That's a myth. No, they can't. Once it starts, then it's a sovereign body. Amendments can be limited is a myth. No, you can't limit the amendments. In fact, the only Constitutional Convention in the history of our country proved that that was the case. They threw away the other one and started a whole new process. The myth, state ratification process will bar mischief. No. If there might not even be a state ratification process. That's the point that has to be considered. A ConCon can't change the whole Constitution. It can, and it did in 1787. A convention of the states is allowed under Article 5? No. A convention of the states is not allowed under Article 5. The process in Article 5 said states petition Congress to call a constitutional convention. So who's in charge? Are the states still in charge? No. Congress is in charge. Right? Nancy Pelosi's in charge. Harry Reid's in charge. Right? And even some of these Republicans that I wouldn't give you a plug nickel for. Although I do believe that there are more good Republicans today than there were previously. Okay, now, if you have a constitutional convention, let's ask some questions. How do you choose the delegates? There's no process for that. How many delegates per state? No process for that. Expenses, who will pay? The people who go to the Constitutional Convention. Who's going to be the chairman? Again, is it going to be Harry Reid? Where to hold the ConCon? Are you going to hold it in the East Coast and keep people from the West from wanting to come because it's all the way across the country? I don't know. What about the safety of the delegates? Who's going to take care of it? I mean, you're going to have a Ferguson, Missouri type situation while they're meeting in the Constitutional Convention? So all of these questions are answered by the Constitution itself. Article 5 says that Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments. And Article 1, Section 8 grants power to Congress to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers in Section 8 and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. So Congress will decide. They will decide what? They will decide how to choose the delegates. They will decide how many delegates per state. They will decide the expenses. They will figure out a way to pay the people who go to it. They will select the chairman. They will decide where to hold the ConCon. The safety of the delegates. Now, Would you want to turn all of that over to some of the people who are in Congress today?
No.
Nor would I. Nor would I. Who favors a ConCon? Unfortunately, there's a lot of quick fix artists. Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments, has been mentioned. Limbaugh, Hannity, and Beck, quick fix artists in my view. The National Tax Limitation Committee, National Taxpayers Union, the Goldwater Institute. I called up down to Goldwater Institute. I've met Barry Goldwater Jr. over the years, and I asked to be put through to him. He answered the phone. I said, Mr. Goldwater, John McManus and John Birch said, oh, he said, how you doing? What's up? I said, I'm just calling to ask, is it true that the Goldwater Institute is in favor of a ConCon? He said, yes, it is. And I said, and you are yourself? Yes, yes, I am. I said, I guess that's the end of the discussion. Right? And it was. I'm sorry to hear that. Well, anyhow, there are other people. George Soros' name has been mentioned. It's the bottom of my list. George Soros doesn't directly fund a lot of these things. He funds some of the activities indirectly. Right? Things like the Wolfpack organization and some of these others. There are leftists who favor a ConCon. The Young Turks, that's the Soros-funded organization. Harvard University's Lawrence Lessig, who recently came back from another Bilderberger meeting. The Alliance for Democracy, the Code Pink, the Independent Progressive Network. I hate the way they use this word progressive. Anybody who says he's a progressive in my way is regressive. Progressive Democrats of America, Sierra Club, Vermont for Single Payer. Right? Opponents of a ConCon. James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, Phyllis Schlafly, Edwin Vieira, Tom DeWeese, former Justice Warren Burger, former Justice Arthur Goldberg, late Judge Robert Bork, Professor Lawrence Tribe of Harvard, Professor Charles Rice of Notre Dame, Professor Gerald Gunther, Stanford, John Birch Society. A lot of people are opponents, more opponents. Some on the left, American Civil Liberties Union, American Federation of Teachers, Americans for Democratic Action, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the NAACP, National Organization for Women, People for the American Way. Some of these groups worry that the Bill of Rights might be canceled. Right? And they should worry about that. So it's quite a mixture of different people. Now, former Supreme Court Chief Justice Warren Burger stated in a letter, the participants in the Constitutional Convention of 1787 had no authority to write a constitution. They were authorized only to revise the Articles of Confederation. But when they got to Philadelphia, they paid no attention to those limits and wisely threw the whole thing away and wrote the Constitution. Right? And that could happen again. Now, if it was thrown away today, if our Constitution that we have today was thrown away, what might come afterward? Something that James Madison and George Washington and some of the other founding fathers would put together? I doubt it. I doubt it very, very sincerely. Right? Former Chief Justice Warren Burger, he is opposed to amendments. He expressed his opposition to a constitutional convention that would have the power to void the entire Constitution. Now, are there any good amendments that I would favor? Yeah. I would like to see repeal of the Amendment 16, the federal income tax. I would like to see repeal of the Amendment 17, the direct election of senators. There are very few Americans who realize that the purpose of having two houses in the federal government was one to represent the people and the other to represent the states. And the states were to choose who would be their senators. And that was changed to a direct election of senators. So now we have a House of Representatives, the voice of the people, and a Senate, the voice of the people. Okay? And the power of the states has been cast adrift. Now, many of the people who favor a constitutional convention are anxious for a balanced budget amendment. They say, look, we've got $18 trillion indebted that they admit to, and you can go on from that, and you add up to well over $100 trillion in unfunded obligations that the federal government has already passed. An enormous amount of indebtedness. It's a hard to imagine number of dollars that they're talking about. So they say, okay, we got to have a balanced budget amendment. But expecting government officials to honor an amendment when they already don't honor the Constitution makes no sense. Some balanced budget amendment proposals allow for 60% in Congress to override it. Some call for tax increases if the budget isn't balanced. That's one way of balancing the budget. Right? Increase the taxes. Some say budget doesn't have to be balanced if there's a war or a national security threat. Some say balanced budget provisions wouldn't take effect for 5 years, meaning at least trillions more added to the already enormous debt in the meantime. And then some say that the way to get around the deficit problem is to declare some expenditures off the budget. That's pretty clever, isn't it? And balanced budget amendments ignore the enormous deficit already accumulated, $18 trillion plus many more trillions of unfunded obligations. Now, there are good ways to balance the budget, and this is what the John Birch Society is in favor of. Congress can cut spending programs for unconstitutional programs. Congress can nullify laws and programs. That's what should be done. Let's not tinker with the Constitution. Unused power in Article 1, Section 7. It actually says that all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House. The power of the purse at the federal level resides in the House of Representatives. If a majority in the House of Representatives say no more foreign aid, no more this, no more that, no more that, that's it. There's nothing the Senate can do about it, nothing the President can do about it, nothing the Supreme Court can do about it, not even the New York Times can do anything about it. That's what we ought to be focusing on. What are some unconstitutional federal programs that Congress can stop by simply stopping the funding of them? Foreign aid, education, Common Core, housing, energy, medical care, etc., etc., etc. On and on you go. Added authority, Amendment 10. The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Go back over that list. Can anybody show me the word education in the Constitution of the United States? It's not there. Can you show me housing? Can you show me energy? Can you show me medical care? Can you show me foreign aid? No. And yet this goes on and on and on. Right? We've dropped the ball. We, the American people, have dropped the ball. We're allowing this to happen to ourselves. It's time to take the ball back and get busy. Cut spending via the Constitution. No federal expenditures for foreign aid, education. We've gone over all that. Right? All right, now let's look at some contrasting proposals here. Use Article 1, Section 7 to cut spending. You need 218 in the House of Representatives. That's a majority. There are 435. 218 is just over the 50%. You don't need anybody in the Senate, and there's no role for state ratifications. So the total you need to cut spending is 218 in the House. Create a balanced budget amendment, what do you need? Well, you need 290 in the House, you need 67 in the Senate, and you need many hundreds in state governments to get that done. And your total adds up to thousands of people you've got to persuade in order to get that done. So which do you choose? Isn't garnering of only 218 in the House easier than getting 290 in the House, 67 in the Senate, the majorities in both houses of state legislatures? Also, isn't the First Amendment safer? Won't it protect the Constitution? Use the Constitution. Don't abuse it. Don't change it. The safe and elected solution, elect reliable members to the House of Representatives. Then the Senate, then the presidency. But if the House of Representatives will start using the muscle that it already has, called the power of the purse, senators would catch on it, then maybe even we'd have a president that we'd be proud of. Now, I like to refer to James Madison. He was the 4th president of our country. He's rightly called the father of the Constitution. He's the one who took notes at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. He's one of the authors of the Federalist Papers to explain the Constitution to the farmers in New York State. He's the author of the Bill of Rights. He became a member of Congress, and he's an opponent of another ConCon. What did he say? He said the authority given to conduct the Philadelphia Convention of 1787 was limited and was for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. They went beyond that mandate. And so a year later, Madison wrote a letter, and in that letter he said, having witnessed the difficulties and dangers experienced by the first convention, which assembled under very propitious circumstances, I should tremble for the result of the second. What were the very propitious circumstances? Well, the very first of them was it was led by George Washington. George Washington, who had such stature and who was so highly regarded by all of those men that when he entered the room, everybody hushed. And he was the head of the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Very propitious circumstance there. Another comment, Judge Robert Bork, recently deceased. It is my view that a federal constitutional convention could not be limited to a single issue. The original Philadelphia Convention went well beyond the purposes for which it was called, and nobody has suggested the Constitution is a nullity for that reason. Interpret the Constitution. Now, you ask your co-workers, your neighbors, maybe even your spouse, maybe somebody else you know, your people you run across. What's the job of the Supreme Court? And almost everybody, if they have any answer at all, will say it's to interpret the Constitution, which is dead wrong. It's not to interpret the Constitution. The task is to rule that a measure is or is not constitutional. Most decisions should be state at the end of it, it's none of our business, and handed the matter back down to the states and to the people themselves. We wrongly allow leaders to make a federal case out of virtually everything. When I was a boy growing up in Brooklyn, New York, I would skin my knee. There weren't many grassy plots around here. And I'd come in and I'd be bawling my eyes out, and my mother would say, "Oh, stop making a federal case out of this." Maybe your mother said the same, right? But they make a federal case. We do over and over again. Now, beginning in 1988, the John Birch Society and a few allies persuaded state legislators in 18 different states to rescind all of the previous ConCon calls, whether it was for a balanced budget amendment or term limits or opposed to abortion or flag burning or whatever. Our attitude was simply that it doesn't matter what issue. If a state has a call for a constitutional convention, it's one of the 30 some odd that are needed in order to call a constitutional convention. So we asked the state legislators to cancel all previous calls for a constitutional convention. And the states of Alabama, Arizona, Georgia, Idaho, Florida, Louisiana, Montana, North Dakota, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, Utah, and Wyoming did as was asked. They wiped the slates clean. Florida then came back later and issued a new ConCon call. So the 18 is now down to 17 that have totally rescinded all that. Right? But the other process to control an out-of-control Congress is nullification. In 2005, Congress enacted what is called the Real ID Act, requiring a federal ID for everybody in the United States. 24 states have refused to implement it, and we don't have a Real ID Act. It wasn't repealed. This is what's called nullification. The states can do that, and 24 states did, and so the federal government does not enforce the Real ID Act. Nullification was advocated by Thomas Jefferson. That a nullification by those sovereignties, the states, of all unauthorized acts done under the color of that instrument, the Constitution, is the rightful remedy. More of that should happen. There's a wonderful book written by a good friend of mine named Dr. Thomas E. Woods about nullification. The title of the book is Nullification. And it's really a small book because half of what you see in the book is appended. You can get the gist of what he's saying. He's quoting Jefferson, he's quoting others. The book has been praised by Judge Andrew Napolitano, columnist Walter Williams, Harry Goldwater Jr., the John Birch Society, numerous others. Nullification is an option. Is James Madison again? Nullification of the law can belong rightly to a single state as one of the parties of the Constitution. The state not ceasing to allow its adherence to the entire Constitution by nullifying something. Summarize. A ConCon is constitutionally legitimate, but a ConCon cannot be limited. There has to be something that says having a ConCon would be a mistake, or else we would have had one in 200 and almost 240 years. There never has been another. I don't want to see another. Excuse me. Oh, you got water for me here. Is it just water? I'm Irish. I'm Irish.
Old Birch goes.
It's just water. ConCon cannot be limited. Wisdom has prevented the creation of a ConCon for the past 220, maybe it's more than 220 years now. Alternatives to a ConCon include forcing Congress to abide by its solemn oath and nullification of unconstitutional measures. So I'm going to go back to lost awareness, where we started. America became great not because of what government did, but because of what government was prevented from doing by the Constitution. And wouldn't you like to see them teaching that in all the government schools, right? So who should you listen to? John Birch Society loves the Constitution enough to want to preserve it. Some ConCon promoters, some calling their proposal a convention of the states, claim to love it, but they seek to change it, even endanger its very existence. I think that's a mistake. So we've got to choose good leadership. Do we choose neoconservatives?
No.
Rhinos?
No.
Unreliable politicians?
No.
Establishment leftists?
No.
Why not choose leadership from the John Birch Society? Now just imagine, ladies and gentlemen, just imagine. Several hundred well-informed and well-organized citizens spreading sound information in a congressional district and then in hundreds of districts. That's the goal of the John Birch Society. It has already worked in some parts of the country. There's no reason why it couldn't work here. There's no reason why it couldn't work even in Massachusetts or Rhode Island. Several hundred, I'm talking what, 300, 400, 500 people in a congressional district can sway the whole district. Maybe not inner city New York, that would take a few. But this is the plan. It's always been the plan. We got a book table, we got a motto. Less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. So we say to people, look, you're good, you have a good group here, keep at it. Maybe some of you want to also join the John Birch Society. That's good. We'll be glad to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. McManus. All right, we want to now take the rest of our time up until about 9 o'clock for an open Q&A. Mr. Davies, if you would come on up to the platform here. And I just want to ask, we have a large group here. I know a lot of you are very passionate about this subject. I would ask that you try to be considerate of all those who are here who do have a question. Please limit your comments to a minute or so and have a question at the end of those comments. We want to try to get as many people, give as many people an opportunity to raise their question as possible. And we'll ask the gentlemen who are speakers if they can try to keep their answers concise. That would be helpful as well. I just want to make a few a few quick announcements, as some folks may have to leave before we are finished tonight. One matter of safety as you are leaving this area. I don't think you'll end up in a trucking terminal, because I think you all may have made that mistake coming and avoided going out. But when you go out the first road and take that right going down AM Drive, just a word of caution, you come to a stop sign. There's that cross street that runs behind the hotels and goes to the left over by the Wawa. Okay, truckers come along that going to the turnpike and they do not stop. You must stop. So please be careful to make a stop. There is a stop sign there at that little intersection where that cross street goes across AM Drive. Also, if you're heading back to Quakertown, be aware that you can't continue out AM Drive and turn left by the pizza shop. You'll want to take that left that goes behind the hotels, go down by the wall and go out that way. Also, as Mr. McManus mentioned, there are quite a few materials out on the tables out here for sale by the John Birch Society. And Lynn, where's Lynn? Are your materials over here, are those also for sale?
Yes.
Okay, so there's several tables there. Please feel free to browse. We don't have to be out of here at any particular time, so you're welcome to stay as long as you would like this evening. Also, we are videoing this. Thank you to Luke Fire, who is in the back videotaping this presentation, which has been excellent so far. If you would like a copy of that emailed to you, do make sure that you have signed up on the sign-in form right on the sign-in table right there outside the door, so that you will get that email. And we would like to keep you on our email list if you would like to continue on that list. If not, you can go to our website. You can unsubscribe if you're just looking for the video, but we will need your email for that. Okay, so I'm just going to take questions from the floor, and we will pass the mic to whichever gentleman. If you're addressing it to one or the other, please specify who. Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. McManus, the system, I believe in the Constitution just like you do, but the system that we have right now is failing. Little by little, constitutional rights have just failed, and little by little eroded away. So your answer is to do exactly what we've been doing for the last 200 years, or you're saying to do something we haven't done for the 200 years, so we're going to do something different that we haven't done for the 200 years, and we're going to solve this problem. The problem continues.
When Bartlett Welsh decided to form the John Birch Society, he took a trip around the world. He visited some national leaders in places like Taiwan, Spain, Germany. One of the more interesting discussions he had was with Konrad Adenauer, the Chancellor of Germany. They called him Der Alte, the older man. Right? And Adenauer was very impressed with what Robert Welsh was planning. And he said, what you're planning is something that every country should have. An educational program conducted by the citizens away from the power of government to limit the government. So that's my answer. Okay? I was at a meeting like this up in Reading, I think it was. And at the end of the meeting, just like this, fellow stood up and he said something along the lines that you said. He said, look, things are broken. Somebody ought to do something. And I said, well, somebody did do something. In 1958, Robert Welch started the John Birch Society. Now, we've run into a lot of opposition, as you probably are aware. Right? A lot of nasty things have been said about us. But that's pretty much going by the board now. And more people are looking to what we have to say. We have an educational program that will fix Congress. Not fix the Constitution, fix Congress. Use the Constitution. That's our answer.
Mr. McManus, my question for you and Mr. Davies. The mother's milk of politics is the lobbying money that flows into K Street that goes into our congressional offices that get these gentlemen elected for the huge sums of money they have to spend to get elected to promote themselves. I would like to hear what your position and Mr. Davies' position is on what is the most tangible way that the electorate, these people who love the Constitution, want to see change, how do we affect them when we're not the ones putting the dollars in their coffers?
Well, if we're the ones back in the communities that are educating the neighbors and the friends and the co-workers and so forth, and telling them, we don't want our congressmen to be accepting the money of the lobbyists from K Street down in Washington, that's the way to combat it. And it can be combated, and it has been combated in some districts in this country. Maybe not here. I happen to come from Massachusetts. People say, how can the president of the John Birch Society live in Massachusetts? I always say I like to work behind enemy lines. But that's the answer. Now, I don't think you can outlaw lobbying. I don't think you can outlaw people saying to a congressman, hey, we'll give you some money for your re-election campaign if you go our route. All right. But that can be countered with good, solid information back at the local level. Mr. Davies.
I agree. I agree with everything John said. I would add to that in my view, the way you get at the whole K Street game is you eliminate the reason why they're there. And if you can get the federal government out of the business of promoting general welfare in the forms of the things that they do, all the things that John listed in his slide, they're not part of the delegated enumerated powers. If the federal government was no longer in the business of virtually every domestic program that we have, and instead it would remain at the state houses, there's a lot of K Street lobbyists that would be out of a job in Washington. They're there to influence policy around programs that should not even be in existence at the federal level. The other thing that I would suggest is that corporations should not pay income tax. That's another huge reason why we have K Street lobbyists. They're in there trying to monkey around with the tax code for the benefit of their clients. They're trying to distort markets for the benefit of their clients, and there's ways to get rid of that that comport with the founders' original intent. And I think the Commerce Clause and the General Welfare Clause, if the framers were here and had the benefit of the last 240 years, they would have worded them differently, I guarantee you. And a lot of other things they would have worded differently. And I'm suggesting that we have the benefit of 200 years of experience with the original Constitution. The Constitution's been hacked. We need to close the back doors. We need to get rid of the viruses. And we need to do some things to, in effect, reset the thing back to original settings. And we can start this whole 200-year process all over again. And I'm happy to say that, we can fix it, I think, using everything that John said, and I think some other things as well, and force the enemies of the Constitution to set them back 200 years, make them start all over.
That's Phil?
Yes.
Speak up, Philip, so the video.
This is for Mr. McManus. You sounds like you're saying that, two questions actually, related. It sounds like you're saying that we can't have constitutional amendments without a ConCon. If that's the case, how have we had constitutional amendments in the past?
I'm having trouble hearing you.
I'm sorry. It sounds like you're saying that we can't have any constitutional amendments without a ConCon, and yet we've had constitutional amendments in the past. So the first question is, how have we had constitutional amendments in the past without having a constitutional convention? The second
Well, let me answer that.
Okay.
All right? There are two ways to amend the Constitution. One is the way we've gotten the 27 amendments we have without a ConCon, and the other is to have a ConCon. So all amendments that we've already had came via the first process, which had nothing to do with a ConCon. So I think you're mixing it up. Okay, your other question.
If founders were against it, why did they put Article 5 in the Constitution?
Well, that's a good question, right? I think what happened is that there were some people amongst the Constitutional Convention of 1787 who said that we ought to have a process for amending the Constitution over and above the states starting it and going through the first part, the first type of a way to amend it. And so they put in some legislation. Now, I'm a great believer in the Constitution. I think it's a wonderful document, but there are some things in it that I would word a little bit differently or a little bit more explicitly, and one of them would be a worry about a future ConCon. It was James Madison who 1 year after the 1787 convention said he would tremble for the process to be repeated in another ConCon. He would tremble for the results. And I think that attitude was probably shared by a lot of others. It was already in the Constitution. They had already sent it to the states. Some of the states were beginning to ratify it, and so forth. The first state to ratify was Delaware. Beat Pennsylvania by 4 days, and Pennsylvania's never forgiven them.
Any question? Sure.
Mr. McManus, I think everyone in this room would agree that we need to do something about the 16th and 17th Amendment. Agree? I don't think there's anybody that would object to that, to repeal the progressive income tax and to get the election of the 2 federal senators back to the state legislatures to give the states the power. Okay, now, reality. And this is where I have the problem with the JPS. Corrupt executive branch, federal government, corrupt Congress, legislative branch, corrupt Supreme Court, corrupt press, uninformed electorate, all of which are contributing to our problem. So explain to me how, other than a ConCon, and I've read your answers, and I've gone on your websites, elect the right people. Really? Let's elect it. We have corrupt elections, right? We could do Philadelphia as a perfect example of the presidential election. One ward, 30,000 people voted for Obama, 0 for Romney. 0? Are you serious? Are you telling me? The people
I don't think it's bad enough throughout the country that it can't be accomplished by simply electing good people at the congressional level.
Yeah, but who finds the way is Mr. Davies away.
The only way to do it. All right, well,
That's the way, if you want to save this country, that's the way you have to do it, Mr. McManus.
Yeah, let me make a quick comment. I'll just make a quick comment. I don't think it's, I agree obviously with what you just said. I don't think though that convention, Article 5 convention is the only way. Again, I'm an all of the above kind of guy. I think we need to do everything that Mr. McManus suggested, especially the education piece, especially for the younger people that are here in the room. You know, in 30 or 40 years, a lot of people in here, it won't matter. But for these young people, it will. And so, again, I think that's why we need to see if we can relatively quickly get in and fix the hack. If we started to, we started this convention process in 2013, my expectation is it will take at least 7 years for it to come to fruition. It'll take a while to have the convention. It'll take a while for states to ratify. There'll be excruciating litigation all the way through it. So it's not going to be a quick process. There are things that can happen in the ballot box, clearly, that can make a difference. I'll say one more thing and then take a question. Yesterday I was in Harrisburg meeting with a state senator. We'll be in Butler tomorrow meeting with another state senator, and then later this month with another one. I can't do that in D.C. Not without spending a ton of money. I can't get to 3 senators, 3 U.S. senators, even the ones from my state, without spending a ton of money in a month's time frame. But I can go to Harrisburg, and so can John. We can talk to people at the state capitol. And so, for me, seems to be the best path, the path of least resistance. Plus, clearly the framers had something in mind. Remember, they had just got done fighting an 8.5-year war. They were intensely fearful of a dominant, oppressive federal government. They were petrified of it. And I think one of the reasons why we have the Article 5 convention out or angled is they were fearful that the states, the sovereign states, would not have any other option. And so they wanted to make sure there was a peaceful way to shortcut that Tyler cycle without going back to another Declaration of Independence and another revolution. I think that's why they did it.
I'd like to come back to this last gentleman here. You remind me of the wisecrack about the older fellow in Chicago who was on his deathbed and he said, well, when I die, bury me here in Chicago so I can remain politically active. That's true. That's true. No, but I and the John Birch Society are persuaded that there are far more than enough good people still left in this country to make things right and to get somebody decent elected and sent it to Congress, right? Now, it doesn't have to be all Republicans.
No.
It doesn't have to be all Democrats. Right? I know of an example of a congressman I highly respect who is a Republican who was opposed by the establishment Republicans in a primary, who poured all kinds of money into that man's district, but he still won the primary, and he's still a congressman. Okay? And that can only be accomplished if the people in the community understand. Right? The John Birch Society is in the business of creating understanding. Right? That's all we've ever tried to do. We don't back candidates. We don't tell people to vote for this or that one. Leave that up to you. But if you have good information, you'll make good decisions at the ballot. And that's what we try to do. Yes, ma'am.
Could both of you tell me what, in 1787, what was the condition of, was there a federal government? Were the Articles of Confederation operating? What
Yes.
exactly?
The country was operating under the Articles of Confederation. They didn't have the power to tax. They didn't have the power to raise army. Several things that they were missing. So the decision was made to have delegates from each of the states go to Philadelphia and fix it. When they got to Philadelphia, they threw it out. And they started over again. And what they came up with, I really like. Right? But if a ConCon was held today, we don't know who would be there to decide anything by the ConCon. We don't know who its leader would be and other questions that I raised. So we've got to be careful. And there has to be something to be said to the fact that all throughout 240 years, there's never been another constitutional convention. Because people are afraid that we lose the Constitution.
Yeah, my understanding, and John's right, the Articles of Confederation were significantly flawed. In addition to Congress not having the power to tax, they didn't really have the power to enforce anything. And there were two big issues that the states were concerned about